Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Tuesday, everybody. Let's start with the economy, and first up, Bloomberg's Hong Kong team reports, citing data from the China Central Depository and Clearing House and Shanghai Clearing House, that overseas funds returned to selling China bonds in January after a 1-month pause. The outlet joins other analysts in explaining the trend as being down to, quote, the relatively unattractive yields on yuan-denominated debt as Beijing keeps monetary policy loose to support growth, end quote. As we can see here, foreign holdings of Chinese onshore bonds in the interbank market, including sovereigns, policy bank debt, and other fixed income securities, slid by over 106 billion yuan, just over $15 billion US, to 3.28 trillion yuan, the lowest level since 2020. There is a lot of pros and cons for betting on the Chinese economy this year, but ultimately, investors are likely looking at projected yields. Quote, as we are expecting recession and ultimately rate cuts in the rest of the world, we see higher yielding and more attractive duration opportunities in the likes of the USA and Mexico, end quote. Next up for the economy, in a widely shared report domestically, Chinese think tank, the National Institute for Finance and Development, predicts that the national economy's debt ratio is likely to slow this year. In the state-run Economic Daily, the State Council-affiliated outlet provides a commentary to accompany this report, in which it observes that the macro leverage ratio, that is, total debt as a percentage of gross domestic product, rose to 273.2% as of the end of 2022. We should note as an aside, some analysts overseas believe that the actual rate may be much higher. The commentary, quoting the think tank report, thinks that this debt ratio will continue to climb this year, but at a slower rate. The National Institute for Finance and Development forecasts that ratio to rise by 5.5 percentage points this year, about half of last year's increase, assuming GDP growth of 5.5%. Some commentators still believe that this is a red flag. Quote, this may seem like a good thing, but the increase in last year's debt burden was the second highest ever. What is more, a 5.5 percentage point increase is slightly above the pre-COVID average. This matters because this year is supposed to be a very good year for controlling the growth in China's debt burden. In fact, I expect the ratio to grow by 3 to 4 percentage points. That's because we will probably get a partial reversal of last year's sharp contraction in consumption, along with a corresponding boost in private investment, and this kind of growth, which Beijing refers to as high quality, doesn't require sharp increases in leverage. If the NIFD is right, and China's debt to GDP ratio rises by 5.5 percentage points, this would imply that in subsequent years, when high-quality growth is once again scarce, it will take much larger increases in the debt burden to generate acceptable growth rates, end quote. Okay, next up, some fairly explosive accusations in the Western press. Hey guys, as always, if you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to hit that like button. With what looks to be some issues with YouTube these last few months, it's also a tremendous help if you know someone who would enjoy this sort of content to share, as the algorithm is not showing these episodes to many new people. And for anyone who can go that extra mile and help me keep the channel financially sustainable, I primarily rely on subscriber support to keep the channel going. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. But to everybody, thank you so much for the ongoing support. Next up, in the last few days, there have been two rather explosive developments published in English language Western media. Apart from both being related to China, these are actually unrelated stories. I just wanted to present them here together. Let's begin with the more important of the two. The first series of stories were published by popular Canada-based The Globe and Mail, which, citing leaked intelligence documents, alleges scandalous PRC interference activities in Canadian elections. The Globe and Mail writes that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and senior aides were warned on at least 2 occasions that government MPs should be cautious of their political dealings with former Ontario Liberal Cabinet Minister Michael Chan because of alleged ties to China's consulate in Toronto. The outlet, citing 2 unnamed intelligence sources, reports that the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, quote, has a dossier on Mr. Chan that contains information on his activities in the 2019 and 2021 federal election campaigns and meetings with suspected Chinese intelligence operatives, end quote. Chan, still a serving politician, told the outlet that he is a, quote, loyal Canadian, end quote, and that the accusations are groundless. In a separate article, the Globe and Mail made even more shocking allegations. Quote, China employed a sophisticated strategy to disrupt Canada's democracy in the 2021 federal election campaign as Chinese diplomats and their proxies backed the re-election of Justin Trudeau's Liberals, but only to another minority government, and worked to defeat conservative politicians considered to be unfriendly to Beijing. The full extent of the Chinese interference operation is laid bare in both secret and top-secret Canadian Security Intelligence Service documents. The CSIS reports were shared among senior government officials and Canada's Five Eyes intelligence allies of the United States, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. End quote. And in another article, the explosive allegations continue. Quote, secret and top-secret Canadian Security Intelligence Service documents viewed by the Globe and Mail outline how China instructed its consulates and visa officers to alert Beijing to prominent and influential Canadians planning to visit China. In a December 2021 report, CSIS explained how Beijing's ruling Chinese Communist Party uses 3 color-coded political interference tactics to gain influence over Canadians here and those travelling to China. Blue refers to sophisticated cyber attacks on targets' computers, smartphones, and hotel rooms for possible blackmail. Gold refers to bribes, while yellow is what CSIS described as honeypots. End quote. If these reports are accurate, then they are very shocking, and these activities would likely extend far beyond just Canada. Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau, speaking to reporters over the weekend, said he has acknowledged before that, quote, China is trying to interfere in our democracy, including during our elections, end quote, adding that this has been happening for some time and in countries around the world, but that, quote, Canadians can have total confidence that the outcomes of the 2019 and the 21 elections were determined by Canadians, and Canadians alone, at the voting booth. End quote. The Chinese embassy in Ottawa has expressed that these reports are false and that, quote, China has always adhered to the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries. End quote. The second other allegation from Anglophone media in recent days is not as big as these Canadian reports, but very interesting nonetheless. The US-based New York Times, in an article titled Hedge Fund Billionaire Gets Billions More to Retire, alleges that billionaire Ray Dalio's exit from Bridgewater was, quote, partly spurred by controversial remarks he had made on television about China's human rights record, end quote. The outlet also writes, citing an unnamed source, quote, inside Bridgewater, Mr. Dalio reasserted a rule dictating that he personally must review and edit the firm's widely read economic newsletter called The Daily Observations for any mentions of China, lest others tone down his praise. End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Always love to hear your thoughts below on the stories we covered. Wherever you are, I hope you're enjoying the day, and I will see you all tomorrow.